It's the last day of the 2014 MLB season, and Jordan Zimmerman was pitching a no-hitter through 8 innings and 2/3. One more out, and he'll have the first no-hitter in Washington Nationals history. Any ball that falls in the outfield will break this bid up. Future MVP Christian Yelich laces a fly ball to left field when Steven Souza, a September call-up who only had 21 at-bats that year, dives for the ball.
Souza, he's got it! He's got it! It's a no-hitter for Jordan Zimmerman!
This was the last out of just one of the over 300 no-hitters there have been over the last 150 years of baseball. No-hitters capture the imagination of players and their attainability, and on any given day at the ballpark, you can witness history. The rules of a no-hitter are in the name. The team needs to finish the game without giving up a hit. Hitters can walk, get hit by a pitch, reach on an error, and even score a run. They just can't get a hit. Today, we'll go through the craziest no-hitters in baseball history. The man born without a hand who got one moment of glory. The pitcher who came inches close to throwing one 3 separate times until he finally did. The king of the no-hitter who threw 7 no-hitters over 3 separate decades. And one pitcher who threw a no-hitter on LSD. Please subscribe to Baseball Heirlooms to get more videos like this. 1 year before Jordan Zimmerman's no-hitter, Henderson Alvarez of the Miami Marlins was pitching a no-hitter also on the last day of the 2013 season. But the Miami Marlins hadn't scored him a run. As they entered the bottom of the 9th, if the Marlins could get one run across, it would be a no-hitter. As they loaded the bases with 2 outs, Alvarez himself stood on deck.
In the bounds. Dodge, check swing, it gets away! Here comes Stanton! It's a no-hitter! Henderson Alvarez! Miami wins it!
Andy Hawkins of the New York Yankees was pitching a dominant no-hit game at Chicago's Comiskey Park with 2 out in the 8th when the Yankees' clumsiness took over. An error and 2 walks loaded the bases. But when Robin Ventura hit a fly ball to left field, it looked like Hawkins and the Yankees would exit with no runs. Instead, Yankees left fielder Jim Leyritz booted the ball. Not 1, not 2, but 3 White Sox scores, still without a hit. The next White Sox batter hit a fly ball to right, where another Yankee could have gotten out of the inning, but he dropped it. It was now 4-0 White Sox, and they never even got a hit. The Yankees lost that game. MLB initially called Hawkins' game a no-hitter, but then they reversed the ruling because Hawkins didn't even pitch 9 innings. The same thing happened to young Red starter Hunter Greene in 2022. The Pirates scored 1 run in the bottom of the 8th, and Greene and the bullpen hadn't given up a hit, but the Reds lost 1-0. In the 2020 and 2021 seasons, MLB had 7-inning games when there was a doubleheader. In one of those, Madison Bumgarner pitched a no-hitter, but it didn't officially count, even though that's how long the game was. The YouTube video of this performance says no hits in a 7-inning game, but it does not say the phrase no hitter. Veteran starter Rich Hill has pitched in over 250 MLB games as of writing, but his best game came in 2017 when he held the Pittsburgh Pirates hitless in 9 innings, but his Dodgers couldn't score a run. So Hill went out in the bottom of the 10th to face Pirates second baseman Josh Harrison.
Harrison hits a high drive to left. Granderson onto the warning track. Leaps and gone. The no-hitter in the game.
He was the first pitcher ever to lose a no-hit bid on a walk-off home run.
Your heart breaks for Rich Hill.
If the hitters are having trouble scoring a run for the pitcher pitching a no-hitter, sometimes pitchers can help themselves. Pitchers used to bat in every game in the AL until 1973 and every game in the NL until 2022. In 1971, Rick Wise of the Philadelphia Phillies had pitched 4 no-hit innings when he homered in the top of the 5th. He then gave up no hits in the 5th, 6th, and 7th innings, led off the 8th with another homer. He completed the no-no in the bottom of the 9th. The only man to ever homer in his own no-hitter did it twice. No pitcher has ever thrown 2 perfect games. Yet, I made this perfect game video 2 weeks before Domingo Germán pitched one, and now some lines are already wrong. If Matt Cain comes out of retirement and pitches a perfect game tomorrow, sue me. But right now, no pitcher has ever thrown 2 perfect games, okay? But no-hitters are common enough that 36 pitchers have done it more than once. In recent history, Tim Lincecum pitched 2 after his prime. Homer Bailey said it twice in back-to-back seasons. And Max Scherzer did it twice in the same season, 2015. Justin Verlander, Bob Feller, Cy Young, and Larry Corcoran have 3. Guys, I have no idea who Larry Corcoran is. Let me do some research here. Okay, he played for the Indianapolis Hoosiers in 1887. I don't know if that should even count. I mean, the American League didn't start until 1908. Okay, let's look at these stats here. Wait a second. 43 wins, 1.95 ERA, 536 innings pitched, 57 complete games in 1 year. That's insane. This guy was a workhorse. Oh my God. Wait, he was 5'3", 127-pound frame. They gave him the name Little Corcoran. He was 5'3" and a pitcher. He was unable to adjust to the life of baseball. He turned to alcohol and died at 32. His grave was unmarked for over 150 years until a group of baseball-loving firefighters spent money on a headstone. Crazy stuff. Larry, you belong on the list of pitchers who've thrown 3 no-hitters. I'm sorry for doubting you. You were clearly very talented. Keep selling Pringles, man. Keep doing your thing. Only one pitcher, though, has pitched 4 no-hitters. In 1955, the Brooklyn Dodgers called up Jewish pitcher Sandy Koufax. He struggled with his command and posted a .394 ERA in his first 6 seasons, barely clinging to a rotation spot. Koufax himself thought about quitting the game for good, but decided against it. And somehow, in 1962, Koufax reinvented himself, becoming an all-star and throwing his first no-hitter against the worst team in baseball history, the 1962 New York Mets. Each year, Koufax got better. In '63, Koufax threw another no-hitter, and the Dodgers swept the Yankees in the World Series, while Koufax dominated in games 1 and 4, earning the World Series MVP in a sweep. In 1964, Sandy Koufax posted a 1.64 ERA and pitched a no-hitter against the Phillies. He now had 3. The next year, Sandy Koufax threw a perfect game against the Cubs. It was his 4th no-hitter in 4 years. You see just how a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. A perfect game is a no-hitter, but a no-hitter is not a perfect game. Wait, then what's a rhombus? That fall, Koufax famously missed Game 1 of the World Series versus the Minnesota Twins because the game fell on Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement and the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. Instead, Koufax started games 2, 5, and 7, posted a .38 ERA in 24 innings in a 7-game series, and won the Dodgers the series, and won himself his 2nd World Series MVP. In 1966, Sandy Koufax didn't throw a no-hitter, but he posted a 1.73 ERA. And he was pitching through tremendous pain. Therefore, he retired early at age 30. In the 5 seasons from 1962 to 1966, Sandy Koufax won 2 World Series MVPs, 111 games, 3 Cy Young Awards, and pitched 4 no-hitters. It was the greatest 5-year stretch of any starting pitcher ever, and many thought the record of 4 no-hitters could never be topped. But Nolan Ryan didn't just top 4 no-hitters, he almost doubled it. The year Sandy Koufax retired, 1966, a young fireballer for the New York Mets made his debut. His name was Nolan Ryan, and in his only start that season, he gave up 5 runs, so the Mets sent him down for another season and a half. When Ryan did come up for the Mets again in 1968, he pitched well, earning a spot on the 1969 Miracle Mets, where he pitched well in the postseason, winning his only World Series title. In 1971, Ryan started strong, coming into his own with a 2.24 ERA for the Mets in the first half, but then exploded for an over 7 ERA in the second half. The Mets decided to trade him to the Los Angeles Angels for third baseman Jim Fregosi. It's one of the worst trades in MLB history. Before free agency, the Mets could have held on to this generational arm talent for as long as they wanted. Instead, Ryan went to the American League, where he thrived. As soon as he left, he became one of the best pitchers in baseball. On May 15, 1973, Nolan Ryan threw his first career no-hitter. Exactly 2 months later, on June 15, 1973, he threw his second. The following year, he had his third. And on June 1, 1975, Nolan Ryan became the second pitcher to ever throw 4 no-hitters. It was now 1975, and Nolan Ryan had already pitched over 9 seasons in MLB. But his career was just getting started. Nolan Ryan is a huge anomaly because his longevity makes no sense and has never been recreated. His remarkable statistics are not in his season-long performances. He never won a Cy Young Award, only made 8 All-Star teams in his 27 seasons. Yeah, 27 seasons. He was never truly the best pitcher in baseball. He just had a wicked curveball and a fastball and blew guys away for almost 30 years. He walked and struck out the most batters ever. This skill set worked well for no-hitters. In 1981, on the Houston Astros, Nolan Ryan got his 5th, breaking Koufax's record. He then went to the Texas Rangers. He was 42 years old, but still had gas in the tank for 4 more productive seasons. In 1990, at age 43, Nolan Ryan pitched his 6th no-hitter. And in 1991, at age 45, he threw his 7th. Nolan Ryan won a baseball game in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. He was in MLB when Sandy Koufax was a player and when Chipper Jones was a player. The smile that Ryan cracks after his 7th no-hitter at age 46 really says it all. He knows he's a man who's somehow beaten Father Time, pitching in 27 seasons over 4 separate decades. In total, the Ryan Express struck out 5,714 batters. The next closest pitcher, Randy Johnson, doesn't even crack 5,000. And he pitched a record 7 no-hitters. Pitching 2 no-hitters in the same year like Nolan Ryan did in 1975 is pretty cool. But how about 2 in back-to-back starts? In 1938, Reds starter Johnny Vander did just that. On June 11th, he played the Boston Bees, later named the Boston Braves, where he no-hit them. And just 4 days later, in the first night game ever at Abbott's Field with Babe Ruth and Jesse Owens in attendance, Vander gave up 8 walks but didn't give up a run or a hit and pitched his 2nd consecutive no-hitter. This has never happened again. One pitcher who came close to doing a similar feat was Dave Steib. In John Boyce's 4-part series on the Toronto Blue Jays starter, he brilliantly goes through how dominant this criminally underrated pitcher was, with a plethora of charts. Steib was statistically one of the best pitchers of the 80s, but was constantly snubbed out of Cy Young Awards, All-Star appearances, and eventually the Hall of Fame. He was exceptionally unlucky, and nothing represented that more than his pursuit of a no-hitter. On September 24th, 1988, Steib lost a no-hitter with 2 outs in the 9th. Amazingly, in his next start, he had a chance to redeem himself, but lost a no-hitter again on the final batter. This was the only echo of Vandermeer's feat. The following year, 1989, Dave Steib was pitching a perfect game against the Yankees and had 1 out to go. It was also broken up on the last batter. The next year, 1990, Dave Steib finally did what he almost had done 3 times before and got the last out of a no-hitter against the Cleveland Indians. Tom Seaver was the New York Mets. Drafted in 1966, just the 4th year of the franchise's existence, Tom Terrific was a beacon of hope for a franchise that had the worst start to its existence in MLB history. Seaver, along with outfielder Cleon Jones, young starter Jerry Koosman, and fireballer Nolan Ryan, led the Mets all the way to the 1969 World Series title. In that year, Seaver almost threw a no-hitter against the San Diego Padres, but with 1 out in the 9th, Chad Qualls got a single. He also won 3 Cy Young Awards for the Mets and 191 wins with the team. But after 1969, for the next 8 years, save for a fluky World Series pennant in 1973, the Mets slowly got worse, as piece by piece, that team collapsed. The only fixture remaining was Tom Seaver. As bad as the Mets were, every 5th day you could come to Shea Stadium and watch a Hall of Famer. A man often called the franchise by Mets fans because of how much he meant to the team. But Seaver had had enough of the losing seasons and asked to be traded. In June 1977, he was to the Cincinnati Reds. In the press conference afterwards, Tom broke down. It was the end of a Mets era, and the Mets were terrible for the next 6 seasons. The year after he was dealt, Tom Seaver did what he couldn't do in the orange and blue for almost 10 seasons and pitched a no-hitter for the Cincinnati Reds.
Greason has it. He goes to the bag, and Seaver's got it. Tom Seaver has pitched his first Major League no-hitter.
The Mets had still never thrown a no-hitter in their franchise history, but there was hope when a young kid from Florida came up with the team in 1984 named Dwight Gooden. Tall and mystifying, Doc's fastball and curve fooled NL hitters for the next 4 years. He threw 23 complete game shutouts in the Mets over his career, but never a no-hitter. Gooden, along with homegrown talent Darryl Strawberry and acquired stars Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter, won the Mets their 2nd championship in 1986. But the team's hopes of a dynasty struggled when both Strawberry and Gooden got into trouble with drug use. The Mets released Gooden in 1995, and his career was almost presumed to be over after repeated stints in rehab and no progress in his addictions. But the crosstown Yankees took a shot at him. With his ailing father watching from a hospital bed, Dwight Gooden pitched a no-hitter for the New York Yankees in 1996. The 2 best pitchers in Mets history, Dwight Gooden and Tom Seaver, each pitched no-hitters for other teams right after they left New York. The Mets had also traded the guy who threw 7 no-hitters, Nolan Ryan. It felt like the Mets were cursed to never throw one. Every time they got close, something happened to fall apart. In 2008, the Mets traded for another great pitcher, Johan Santana, who had dominated the American League at the beginning of his career, winning 2 Cy Young Awards during the steroid era. But after a dominant first year with the Mets in 2008, Santana struggled to stay on the field. Entering his 2012 start against the St. Louis Cardinals, manager Terry Collins said Johan would be on a strict 110-pitch limit after coming off a shoulder injury. But on this June Friday night, Santana battled through 5 walks and many long at-bats against the defending World Series champions. In the 6th, Carlos Beltran laced the ball down the left field line that was called foul, but it was probably fair. Yadier Molina hit a deep ball to left field in the 7th, but Mike Baxter, a career backup left fielder for the Mets, dove for the ball, breaking his shoulder on the left field wall, but securing the ball and keeping the no-hitter intact. As the innings went later, Santana's pitch count went higher, but instead of sticking to the limit, Collins decided to keep him in. Down 3-0 in the count with 2 outs in the ninth to reigning World Series MVP David Freese, Johan worked his way back to a 3-2 count. And on his 134th pitch of the night, Santana did something that hadn't been done in the first 8,020 games in the history of the New York Mets.
He struck him out! It has happened! In their 51st season, Johan Santana has thrown the first no-hitter in New York Mets.
They see this guy running towards the dog pile? That's not a Mets player. He's wearing shorts. That's just a guy, and he got arrested. Over the last 30 years, Japan has produced many stars for Major League Baseball: Ichiro Suzuki, Hideki Matsui, and Shohei Ohtani. But before Hideo Nomo, no player had jumped from the Japanese League to MLB in over 30 years, due to an agreement between the leagues. In 1993, Japan's best starting pitcher, Hideo Nomo, wanted to challenge this system, and together with an agent, they figured out a loophole in the agreement with the leagues where Nomo could retire from baseball in Japan at age 26 and would then be able to sign with an American team. For this act, Nomo was lambasted by the Japanese public as a traitor. He had not negotiated in good faith with his team. But over in the American League, well, not the American League, the American League compared to the Japanese League. He was on the Dodgers, he was in the National League, but you know what I mean. Nomo made his debut in 1995 with the Dodgers and wowed baseball teams with his unorthodox windup and won the Rookie of the Year in 1995. The following season, Nomo didn't pitch from his patented windup once in his start due to the light rain on the mound at Coors Field. The Rockies that year had a fantastic hitting lineup, and the thin air of Coors Field often created above average offense, but that didn't stop Nomo from no-hitting them that night. 5 years later on the Red Sox, Hideo Nomo got another no-hitter. As Japanese citizens saw one of their own succeed on the highest baseball stage in the world, they began to respect Hideo Nomo. Rather than seeing him as a traitor, Nomo became a local hero, opening the door for many more Japanese stars. When Hideo Nomo made his debut for the Dodgers, it was called Nomo Mania, but it paled in comparison to the hype created at Chavez Ravine in 1981 called Fernando Mania. That year, a screwballer with an insane windup from Echohuaquila, Mexico, a town with under 2,000 residents, came from nowhere and wowed baseball in his first 8 starts. He had an ERA less than .5, and LA, a town full of Mexican heritage, began to love Valuezuela as one of their own. His starts were all sold out. 9 years after this, Fernando pitched his only career no-hitter at Dodger Stadium. But it wasn't even the only one that day, because just minutes before the game in LA had started, Dave Stewart of the Oakland Athletics finished up his no-no. This is the only time there have ever been 2 no-hitters on the same day. Pirates pitcher Doc Ellis was taking acid one night because he thought he was pitching in 2 days. When he woke up the next morning delirious, his girlfriend told him no, he was pitching that day.
The next day, which I thought was the next day, she told me, you better get up, you got to go pitch. I said, pitch? I pitch tomorrow. Hell, what are you talking about? Because I had got up in the middle of the morning and took some more acid. She grabbed the paper, brought me the sports page and showed me, boom. I said, oh, wow. What happened to yesterday?
Delirious on LSD, Ellis couldn't even see the hitters. He could only tell if they were on the left or right side of the batter's box. In Ellis's eyes, the ball was either massive or minuscule, and he was hitting and walking people left and right. But somehow, by the 9th inning, he hadn't given up a hit. Ellis himself says that the LSD helped him not get anxious. Then, Doc Ellis, on LSD, finished the job and threw a no-hitter. Our last story is pretty simple but poetic. Jim Abbott was born without a right hand, but despite this, he wanted to play professional sports, and he was talented enough to develop ways to adapt his impairment.
He shifts his glove over to his left hand so he's ready to field. For him, it's second nature.
And one day at Yankee Stadium, Jim Abbott threw a no-hitter, defying all the odds.
And the ground ball is short. Velarde, he did it. He did it. No hitter for Jim Abbott.